In the midst of all our excitement about Haverford Day and the Can Drive and Agnes Irwin Day and Spirit Week, we take time out today to honor our veterans and to celebrate Veterans Day. In 1921, an American soldier, his name known but to God, was buried on a Virginia hillside overlooking the Potomac River in the city of Washington. The Arlington National Cemetery, burial site of this unknown World War I soldier, became the personification of dignity and reverence for Americans' veterans. Similar ceremonies occurred in England and France, where an unknown soldier was buried in each nation's highest place of honor. In England, Westminster Abbey; in France, the Arc de Triomphe. These memorial gestures all took place on November 11th, giving universal recognition to the celebrated ending of World War I hostilities at 11 a.m., November 11th, 1918, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. The day became known as Armistice Day. Armistice Day officially received its name in America in 1926 through a congressional resolution. It became a national holiday 12 years later by similar congressional action. If the idealistic hope had been realized that World War I was in fact the war to end all wars, November 11th might still be called Armistice Day. But shortly after the holiday was proclaimed, World War II broke out in Europe and shattered the dream. 16.5 million Americans took part. 406,000 died. The families and friends of those dead long for a way to honor their memory. President Eisenhower in 1954 signed the bill proclaiming November 11th as Veterans Day, and he called for Americans everywhere to rededicate themselves to the cause of peace. On May 30th, 1958, 2 more unidentified American war dead were brought to Arlington Cemetery from overseas and interred in the plaza beside their comrade of World War I. One was killed in World War II, the other in the Korean War. A law passed in 1973 provided for the internment of an unknown American who lost his life in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. To honor these veterans, symbolic of all Americans who gave their lives in all wars, an Army Honor Guard, the 3rd U.S. Infantry, the Old Guard, keeps day and night vigil. We are honored as we celebrate our Veterans Day to have veterans who are Episcopal graduates and Episcopal Academy faculty and staff with us today. And I'd like to ask them to stand as I read their names. Frank Nagel, class of 1938. Carl Rugart, class of 1941. If you could stand, please. Alan Lukens, our speaker today, class of 1942. Dick Lander, class of 1944. Winky Bennett, class of 46. David McMullen, class of 1955. Drew Jackson, class of 62. Gardner Pearson, class of 1963. Tom Zug, class of 64. Jim Perry, class of 66. Bill West, class of 55. Alan Chagan, class of 60. Cappy Markle, class of 61. And from our own faculty and staff, Andy Hess, Hank Albright, Bill McCardle, Paul Rosenberg, John Strand, and I'm not sure he can be with us, but James Polk. And if there are any other veterans I've omitted, please stand now. But can we all thank these individuals for their service? Thank you, gentlemen. You may be seated. We are honored by your presence with us today. To introduce today's speaker, let me call up Cameron Maple.
Good morning. Today is a very special day. Today is a day we think, reflect, and honor those who have fought and continue to fight for peace and freedom in our world. Today we are all honored to have the opportunity to hear from Mr. Alan Lukens. Mr. Lukens, who has spent much of his own life fighting for the freedoms of others, is one of our very own. He's an alumnus of the class of 1942. Episcopal nurtured Mr. Lukens' passions of current events, and following his time at Episcopal, he served in the European theater, a vast area of fighting in World War II, and later earned an A.B. degree from the Woodrow Wilson School of International Affairs at Princeton University. Mr. Lukens also devoted another 40 years of foreign service, many of which concentrated on the continent of Africa. Mr. Lukens retired from foreign service in 1987 with the title the United States Ambassador to the Congo. Over the years, Mr. Lukens has served all over the world, in places like Turkey, Paris, the Congo, Morocco, South Africa, and amongst others. He has also served in several integral posts in the U.S. State Department. Following his retirement in 1987, he has led a crisis management team which counsels American embassies on counterterrorism strategies, acted as a chair of the National Cathedrals Committee on Africa, and headed a foundation named Credo, which has helped to support the blacks of South Africa with their transition to democracy in their country. Mr. Lukens' life epitomizes one of service, compassion, and care for others, and serves as a great example as we remember the service of other brave men and women on this day. Please stand to greet Mr. Alan Lukens.
Thank you very much. Please sit down, everybody. Well, Cameron, that was a very generous introduction, and thank you very much. And I'm impressed to be, overjoyed to be with other veterans from Episcopal and some close cousins who are also here. I was fortunate enough to speak at my 50th reunion in 1992 at Chapel, the old chapel. So here it's a splendid pleasure to be back here again. My Episcopal ties go way, way back. My father graduated in 1911, exactly 100 years before your senior class, which is gathered here today. My aunt, Elizabeth Lukens, headed the lower school in the 1930s, and my uncle Alan, for whom I was named, was in the class of 1909 and was killed in World War I, and his name is on the plaques in your center from the First War. Today is a very special one for me and for all of us veterans as we gather together to celebrate our common patriotic heritage. I know that this year in chapel, Cameron told me, you are remembering the 13th Corinthian lesson of faith, hope, and love. These attributes are what kept Dachau survivors alive while waiting for their liberation. Today I'm going to tell you about this unique experience I had at Dachau, the largest concentration camp in the world it was. How did I end up in Dachau in April 45? Well, I began my Army career in the 10th Mountain Division, the ski troops in Colorado. Suddenly one day I won a sort of an exam and they transferred me to Indiana University to learn Turkish. I no sooner got there than they decided they didn't need any Turkish scholars, and all of us were sent down to Camp Camel, Kentucky, to the 20th Armored Division, where I became used my trigonometry that I had learned here as to how to aim our guns and weapons. We sailed for France in early 45, and about a month later we moved from Rouen, in a village near in northern France where we were, up to, went through Belgium and Holland, and then into Germany. We moved pretty fast south. We took Frankfurt, and we were on the way to capturing Munich in April 45. Suddenly, without warning, we came upon this enormous concentration camp. Communication was very different from today when you have cell phones and radios and all. Not even our generals and colonels had the slightest idea that we were about to run into this monstrous camp. Suddenly, I happened to be our little section of the 20th Armored Division. I was with it, the artillery, and we came to the edge of this enormous camp, surrounded by barbed wire and a moat. And we used our artillery to blast a hole in this barbed wire and all. And then our infantry started to come in to liberate the camp. There were white flags hanging from the big tower, and we thought it would be an easy thing to walk in. Unfortunately, that was a ruse, and they started firing at us, actually killed our colonel. And so we had to use our artillery to blast back at this last bastion of the Nazis. After that, they were gone, and many of their guards had been already killed by a lot of the survivors inside. It was an incredible sight, awful sight. There were 35,000 survivors left. They all hugged us, ran over to see us. They looked like skeletons. They only weighed about 80 pounds each. A few of us were chosen to look around the camp. We were surrounded by these starving survivors who hugged us. They couldn't really believe that they were free. We tried to feed them, which is a natural thing to do. But our officers stopped us, fearing we would catch typhus, the disease which most of them had. Even feeding them would have hurt them, because if people are starving, you can't suddenly give them food or their whole bodies would be disrupted. As we walked around, just a few of us, we counted 37 railroad freight cars jammed with dead bodies. These prisoners had been brought in from other camps on these trains in these European freight cars, which were originally designed for 40 men or 8 horses, but there were about 200 bodies jammed in each of these. There's 37 places. We were invited to look at the crematorium, which was still working because they had to clean up the bodies, and the Polish prisoners were told to keep on doing that. After we had seen that, we walked to the commander's fancy quarters, and where I liberated this Nazi flag. It's still from. Anyway, they soon after that, they said we had to get out of the camp for health reasons, but also because we had to go on and take Munich, which we did the next day, and then we went on down to Salzburg and took that the day the war ended. By a happy coincidence, the Free French 2nd Armored Division converged with us on Salzburg, and I was the only one that could speak French, and so we ended up celebrating VE Day, May 8th. The French had liberated a champagne factory and took care of a lot of chickens that were no walking. So we had a nice celebration together that night.